Good day, everybody. This is Trey Johnson with Zap. We're going to get started in just a moment, but in advance of some others joining in, we wanted to go ahead and just post up a poll and give everybody a chance to let us know why they're here. So if you'll take just a moment to reply to the poll, that would be excellent, and we'll get started momentarily. Great. Well, we're getting a lot of good responses, as I can see. We're going to give it about another 10 seconds, and then we'll get started. So get those last second votes in. And we'll close it out in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So excellent. So again, my name is Trey Johnson. I'm here along with Rich Ecker. We're going to talk to you a little bit today. We had a much longer working title for this webinar, but the reality of it is we just simply want to help you understand how to, when it comes to data and analytics, make your CFO happy, especially those folks that are using SAP Business One. And so with that, I can tell you we are enjoying our webinar series, but as some of you have attended before, you'll know that we actually very much miss seeing so many of you in person, whether it's been at the SMB Innovation Summits with the partner community or at the Biz.One conference with those of you that are end users of SAP Business One. We're really looking forward to the opportunity to be face-to-face with you at some point in the near future here. And we certainly hope everybody has stayed healthy and well during this slightly challenging time. So from an agenda standpoint today, what we'd really like to cover off is helping you understand, the ways to source key information from your SAP Business One deployment. We're going to talk about the integration elements of what other data brings to the table in terms of the overall view of the business. We'll certainly describe and talk to the way that tools, are possibly a little bit different for users in different job functions, but there's still a need for the data to be very consistent for them. And then lastly, we'll really close out with, the things that I think are very kind of CFO oriented, in terms of helping you understand ways that having good data and a great data platform certainly helps out quite a bit with the financial close processes and making sure that you have the ability to equip your CFO and others with the ability to not only answer some basic questions from the financial statements, but to go beyond that with a full range of tools. So if you're not familiar with Zap as an organization, we're a globally distributed organization. We're very fortunate to have customers in over 45 countries. The various pinpoints you see on the map are actually the locations of our staff. So we have a number of staff present in all of the variety of local geographies. I know that this is a fairly international call that we have going on. Rich and I are in Florida talking to you, but I know many of you are throughout EMEA as well. So we're very much looking forward to kind of covering off this topic today. Our big goal is to make sure that you understand, whether you're a partner or end customer, that you have local resources to support you in the things that you want to do, especially if it involves making your CFO happy. And so when we look at SAP Business One, certainly it is a very rich source of data. Zap has had the good fortune of working with a number of ERPs, and we know through the customers that we have that are running our solution on top of SAP Business One, that there's really practically no functional area that SAP Business One enables that isn't of interest from a financial perspective. What this ultimately means is that, you know, a lot of organizations, maybe some of yours or those of you who are partners, your customers, the SAP Business One data can represent, you know, 75 to 90% of the data that, you know, the financial side of the business wants to look into. Certainly, as you look at the various processes that are on the graphic on the left-hand side, many of those have financial underpinnings, and certainly data that's financially oriented underpinning them. From an organization standpoint, there's always some challenges as it relates to how do we get out the information that we need to see strategically and tactically, whether it be operational or highly analytical. And certainly, you know, not lost in all of this is that there's a number of tools that people have been using to various degrees of success. I would imagine that many of you on this call have probably not quite found the exact right tool set, and so that's possibly part of the reason why you're here today. So from a perspective of how to source key data from SAP Business One, you know, there are a variety of options, and certainly some of you on the call have had the opportunity to explore some of these. Others may be a little bit more new to the SAP Business One ecosystem. For starters, there's the exportation of data, you know, and loading it up into Excel, and we'll talk about, you know, some of the nuances of this in just a moment. Others have, particularly with the SQL-based versions of SAP Business One, have just opened up query tools and started to query and extract the data in that way. Others are, you know, leveraging out of the box, you know, reports, or possibly have worked with their implementation partner or as consultants are working with Crystal Reports directly to deliver some reporting on top of B1. There's other tools that have been introduced, and you know, I should actually have updated the bullet on this slide. You know, SAP Cloud Analytics is certain, or Analytics Cloud, I should say, is one of those tools, as is the Dragon Relate reporting. And then Zap Data Hub, which we'll talk about a little bit towards the end. You know, we're trying to keep this highly educational, but you know, we will in our software spotlight towards the end of this session help you understand a little bit more about Zap Data Hub as a product. So let's talk about why some of these various options for getting data out of SAP Business One don't necessarily excite the CFO or particularly make them happy. Certainly, you know, if you're exporting the data for loading into Excel, it probably does feel a little bit like the dark ages, you know, in terms of the way of getting data out of a system, you know, interacting with it. There's probably somebody that's on this call that is the person that is really responsible for acquiring data and getting it into Excel and handing it out. And we call those people the report hander outer. And, you know, it's not really a fun existence, to say the least. It's certainly not a great use of, you know, people's time. From a SQL queries tool standpoint, you know, the challenges that present themselves there is really that, you know, there's a level of sophisticated skill set that, particularly in these economic times, is probably tasked with other things than simply just, you know, writing queries to extract data. And you know, certainly as people say, well, I'd like to see this information or I'd like to interact with this data, you know, all of that just starts to create a backlog around that person or those few people. And you know, at some point, that desire to continue to probe and pry and get into the system either moves beyond that person's knowledge, and therefore it creates some complexity that's unnecessary, or it's just simply overly costly to answer some simple questions. And so those sorts of things, you know, obviously don't create happiness for the CFO. Moving forward, even in the realm of standard reports and Crystal reports, you know, the bullet probably says a lot here in terms of the CFO probably would be happy if they worked. And I know that many of you are facing some challenges of multi-company within your B1 environments, or potentially some challenges around currency conversion, or just simply the desire to include other data, which we'll talk about in a moment. From a consulting standpoint, the interactions that we've had with our partners are certainly they're there to help with regard to reporting, but the vast majority, I think, of the consulting partners that we work with, that's not really where they want to spend their time adding value to a customer. And so as a result, you can kind of stereotype, report writing as a lower value kind of exercise for all parties. And so as a result, the inability to get reports is a challenge. The inability to get financial statements is probably a real reason to be unhappy. And unfortunately, far too often we interact with CFOs and financial decision makers that are expressing exactly that they're not quite getting the reports and the outputs that they need to financially run their business. Drag and relate reporting, if you're familiar with that, it's obviously something that's out there and it's available. There's a really a summary of this is, if it worked, great. Many of you probably wouldn't necessarily be here, but the proper perspective on this is what level of investment is needed to really make it work well. And that, I think that's probably the bigger challenge. And certainly, as it relates back to the SAP Cloud, Analytics Cloud, I think some of you have possibly heard that, there are some changes with regard to the user counts and those sorts of things. And as a result, paying more for something that possibly doesn't give you all of the insights that you need is equally challenging. And again, based on what we've heard from CFOs, doesn't make them particularly happy. So, we'd be remiss if we didn't at least talk a little bit about Zap Data Hub in terms of the structure of what we do. And so our tool set, Zap Data Hub, interacts with SAP Business One as really a primary smart data source. We have smart data sources for a number of ERPs, but we also have connectivity to a wide range of other data sources. So if you have an external CRM application or simply have external Excel data, those sorts of elements can be brought in to the Zap Data Hub platform, from which you can build reports, analytics, and the like using a variety of tools. Power BI is certainly one of the options that we'll talk about a bit more in the software spotlight and then some of the subsequent slides. But you can also use other tools anything that can directly interact with a SQL-based database can be leveraged for the purposes of reporting and analysis. And what Zap Data Hub is truly doing is a lot of the heavy lifting of extracting the data, from B1 and your other data sources. One of the things that we've discovered, particularly as it relates to reporting, that creates a level of dissatisfaction is many of you may have experienced where reports were built for a particular business area. So the sales organization may have some reports that were built for them, and the purchasing organization may have some reports that were built for them. But because of the fact the logic was built in kind of two different time frames, a lot of times that logic isn't exactly correct or isn't exactly matching. And so, you've probably seen the scenarios in your business where a purchasing report says X and the sales report says Y and the financial statement says Z. And that inability to kind of correlate the data amongst those reports really starts to create scenarios where people aren't sure what to believe. And as a result, that too contributes to the dissatisfaction. So if you think back to what we just showed with the Zap Data Hub piece, what we're doing is we're building the data platform that underlies the reporting. And that means that the numbers are consistent, that there is calculations and logic that are built into a data layer versus built into the individual reports. And as you see on more the right-hand side of this slide, that inability to integrate between SAP Business One and maybe some of the reports offered by other ISV products or products out of the Certified Solutions Directory makes it more challenging. And go even further to that inability to bring in data from other sources, such as your CRM applications, your other database applications, data in the cloud, and data in Excel. So all of those things, certainly contribute. And that's what really leads us to kind of our next topic, which is how the integration of other data broadens the view. And I think it's probably pretty important to focus on where we are today, and I think that from a current world standpoint, some of you are probably sitting in just healthy and incredibly strong organizations, Others might be sitting in organizations that maybe are still kind of recovering and possibly developing kind of a new means of going forward as an organization. Mergers and acquisitions tend to flourish during these types of periods. And so what tends to happen from a data standpoint on the mergers and acquisition side is organizations may have standardized on SAP Business One and be quite happy and reporting well off of it, but there may be some other ancillary organization that gets acquired, and they may have a different ERP, and they may have other systems that the data needs to be integrated from. That is one of the exceptional things that Zap Data Hub does, and it's certainly important for people to think about, how that factors into the reporting. But even in the scenarios where mergers and acquisitions aren't in play, it's just simply a scenario of many businesses are now re-looking at the systems that they use. And so you may have been using formerly a CRM application in one kind of form, but you may have heard from business leadership that they want to use a different cloud-based application, and as a result, you have some old data in one system, some new data in another, and you still have SAP Business One, but you need to help craft that total picture, because as much as there's financial outcomes and things of that nature that the CFO wants to see, there's also a real requirement in a lot of organizations for not only the CFO, but the senior leadership to have a total picture of the business. And so as that picture expands, and particularly as you look not only across systems, but across geographies, you end up in situations where possibly multiple currencies are coming into play, a lot of those other sorts of things that need to be handled, from a data standpoint. And what really ultimately becomes the benefit is when we can integrate the data from these other sources, we get to really start to see where some efficiencies exist or, possibly don't, and we need to improve. Whether it's elements of supply chain or customer acquisition in totality, that ability to analyze where you first were introduced to a prospective customer all the way through the relationship with that customer to where they are today and how you're capitalizing on that relationship is a very powerful thing. And nothing against SAP Business One, but it's not going to give you all of that information. You have to integrate other sources of data as well. You also get the opportunity to see, where in the case of multiple companies running in SAP Business One, intercompany dependencies are good or potentially bad because of the nature of really being able to report off of all of those companies in one view. You do get the opportunity to really look closely at that, whether it's just simply analyzing from a general ledger standpoint and a chart of accounts, or it's looking more closely at some of the operational transactions that occur between those organizations. Oftentimes, what needs to happen is moving beyond the confusion of where did the data come from, and give tools back to the business to support them looking at, well, this is how we'll make this more efficient. This is how we'll get into a better place. And again, if you improve the business operationally and you provide insight operationally, there's a pretty good chance you're going to not only make your CFO happy, but make your leadership happy as well. So let's talk for just a moment about the analytics tools for users, and particularly by their job function. And so in order to do that, let's look first at just some simple examples that are in Power BI. And so one of the things that is really key is within our sample analytics that Rich will talk a little bit about as well, we have built dashboards for a variety of different constituents or decision makers. It's all built on top of the same data and the same data platform, but allows for them to ask their own set of questions and really start to explore the data in their area to get their additional answers. And so in this particular simplified view, the red box just shows that we can interact with filters and we can drill down on that information and the like. Down at the bottom of the screen, we've just simply highlighted the fact that there are multiple tabs within this particular Power BI report that allow for you to look at other analytics that are related or complement, that initial view that people were interacting with. And all of the analytics, support the opportunity to do some exploration. And what's really great and possibly not understood, especially if you're not really familiar with Power BI, is there's all these wonderful features that Microsoft continues to add to it as a platform. One of these happens to be, the ability to right click on a number, as we've done in this particular chart, and choose the analyze option and say, hey, can you explain this increase? And what happens next is as we do that, there's actually machine learning that has gone off and said, hey, here are some of the contributing factors. And what's not obvious on this particular screen, but there is actually a scrolling set of feedback. So you can actually get a lot of insight. Some of it might be a near miss because machine learning is not perfect, but some of it might be dead on and certainly help the decision maker who is staring at a chart and going, I don't quite understand this, get to a level of clarity without having to do a lot of digging themselves, which is obviously a very powerful thing, and candidly is something that's possibly not enabled in other tools that many of you are using today. So as we talk about Power BI and we talk about getting tools in the right hands of the users, many of you probably have folks that have a need to, in more of a mobile capacity, interact with the information. And that's why Power BI Mobile is such a powerful part of the Power BI portfolio of technology. It's where you can have people that are outbound staff, in a sales capacity or interacting with customers, having, mobile connectivity. But you can also have folks that are just really the only device that they can practically use in their job is more a small form factor or a mobile form factor. Having that ability to do that analysis and interact with the same data that the senior leadership is interacting with, but just on a different scale, on a different type of device. Additionally, if you're not familiar with Power BI, a lot of people feel like that means that they're having to give up Excel or give up the tools that they've used quite often. We know quite often that when we interact with our ERP customers, that many of them have great skills and longstanding investments around Excel as a product to review data, review information, those sorts of things. Nobody wants to take that away. As a matter of fact, because of the Power BI platform, you can very much choose to analyze in Excel, and you can interact with the data that has come from B1 and other sources, courtesy of Zap Data Hub, very easily. And so as a result, you are still very much interacting with data within Excel, but you're doing it in a manner that is very consistent with all of the other users within the business. And for those scenarios where you have a continuing need to do things that, let's just call it out and say that are crystal-like in nature, that are requiring that you go to different levels of detail, paginated reports, things of that nature, the Power BI Report Builder is a very powerful tool in that regard. And again, it has that same ability to interact with that same data set. So the time is spent more on making sure that the reports are answering the questions as opposed to questioning where the data came from. And that becomes a very powerful element for everybody that's involved. And beyond all of those tools, there's one powerful component that was really the start of Power BI, and that's the Power BI Desktop. And the Power BI Desktop is really a full-fledged analytics design environment that the analytics that Rich will show or he'll talk about were built using principally Power BI Desktop. And what's great about the desktop application for Power BI is it oftentimes starts out with somebody that's IT or technically oriented in your business interacting with it, but there is an ability to really get others within the organization, regardless of kind of where they sit, starting to potentially interact with Power BI as well and do some basic reports, some basic dashboards, some basic analytics, and their knowledge can evolve really exponentially because, again, if you're using a tool like Zap Data Hub in conjunction with Power BI, they're not trying to figure out where do they go within B1 or elsewhere within your business to get data, but more they're focused on how do I present this information in the way that is going to consistently answer the questions that we need to have answered. And so as a result, it becomes very powerful for the organization. Now we know that many of you have not quite yet started with Power BI, and that's why we highly encourage people to go out to AppSource, which will provide a little bit more information on a little bit later in the presentation. But AppSource is where you can download our SAP Business One analytics for free, interact with them, kind of see what it's all about, and as a result, be in a good position to determine if those types of analytics are of value to your business. Let's talk about kind of one last topic here, and that's really the streamlining process around financial close and other recurring related processes. And the topics that we really want to cover off as it relates to this is we want to ensure that the right blend of metrics exists for the finance team and the finance organization. Because if you have the right metrics in place, a lot of other things fall in, ensuring that the perspectives are met. We want to talk just momentarily about avoiding the traps of data preparation, and certainly the need to refresh data at different intervals. And so let's cover those things off fairly quickly, because I know everybody's probably eager to get to the software spotlight with Rich here in just a few minutes. So from a blend of financial metrics, a lot of these hopefully are metrics that your organization already endeavors to create. If they aren't, not a big deal. It is part of the Zap Data Hub platform in terms of how we extract data from Business One, how we integrate other ERP data, and ensure that you're in a position that you can look at, all elements, whether it be the current ratio or, the days in inventory outstanding or the leverage ratio. All of these are simply built in. And so being built in means that they're available for use within the reporting tools. So if I kind of move forward here, here's just a screenshot that kind of catalogs, if you will, a lot of the different out-of-the-box analytics that we provide through Power BI. So if a person's doing Power BI design for the first time, they don't have to worry about how am I going to calculate gross margin, or how am I going to calculate working capital, or how am I going to look at some of my leverage indicators. All of those are available and exist, and you can really focus a lot more on what do I need to do for the purposes of presenting the information in the right way. Equally, we really want to make sure that people avoid some of the traps of data preparation. So if you're that person that is extracting data manually from SAP Business One, you probably have a lot of knowledge around some of these items. Certainly some of the data traps that can kind of pop up, currency conversions for reporting. So, there's certainly the transacted currency, and there certainly are some reporting currencies, but there's also requirements to ensure that you use different types of calculations when you convert, particularly from an accounting perspective. And so that really factors in fairly heavily in ensuring that not only what you see on a sales report, everything converted to US dollars, but also what you see on the financial report really makes sense for the whole of the business. Another one that's a real common scenario that we see is, hey, we're ABC Corp, and we have recently acquired these other organizations that are operating somewhat independently, but we want to blend them together in a common chart of account structure. Well, that is something that can be done fairly readily in an automation tool like Zap Data Hub. It's obviously a bit of a trap, for people that are trying to handcraft processes and maybe are doing crazy stuff like VLOOKUPs and everything else in Excel to get there. So if you're managing against different or disparate fiscal year definitions, that too can be a little bit of a challenge. Maybe at some point in your organization's life, your fiscal calendar changed. That can be accommodated with a good data platform, but it is potentially a trap. And certainly, the other options that are listed here, if you're starting to explore any of this as a manual element in Excel, or you're doing that today, I think that you're possibly a little bit trapped already. And so it's something for us to maybe have a slightly longer conversation with you about. So let's talk about the few other things here. Certainly the refresh of the data. You want to refresh the data in the data platform at the intervals that make sense. What that ultimately means is that you don't have to bring all of the data out of B1 and your other data sources all at the same time. As a matter of fact, we have a number of customers that use Zap Data Hub as the underpinnings for their financial reporting. And so as a result, they refresh the financially reporting related data very frequently, particularly at period end, such as the end of the month or the end of the financial year. And they do that every 15 minutes, that sort of thing, or even more frequently. But there's other elements that don't need to be processed nearly as frequently. So I don't think that your sales team, possibly unless you're Amazon, is transacting so quickly that you'd want to refresh dozens of times throughout the day. As a result, some of those sorts of things, supply chain and others, those can be refreshed a bit more infrequently, 1 or 2 times a day. In some cases, there's information that you may only update or consider updating once a week. But in all cases, everything that you do to refresh the data out of the system, whether you're using Zap Data Hub or any other platform, it should be incremental, because the worst thing in the world, and unfortunately we hear about this a little bit too often, is that the reporting tools bring the ERP to a halt because they're asking such complicated things and taking too much data out of the system, so on and so forth. And incremental extract simply means that if you're running this every 15 minutes, that we're only grabbing the ledger transactions that have been added or changed versus grabbing all of the data all of the time. So hopefully that makes sense. So we're running a little short because I do want to make sure we give Rich time for his demo, but let's talk quickly about really making sure you're empowering your CFO in terms of their needs. And so the range of data and analytics needs that exist starts obviously on the lower left with the system reports, and then matures all the way through to being able to monitor business processes. Frankly, a lot of organizations we encounter, there may be 1 or 2 boxes into this kind of maturity continuum. As a result, they're probably not getting a lot of return on the information that's in B1 as an application or the data across the whole of their company. And so that's something that obviously we want to make sure that we're giving you the opportunity to present that much more full picture. And so again, from a full picture standpoint for the decision maker, especially the financial one, having Zap Data Hub interact with not only Business One, but interact with your other ISV applications, as well as other applications that exist within your system portfolio, such as cloud-based or other database applications, means that you get a consistent data platform. And again, you can use tools like the Power BI Mobile, the ability to analyze in Excel, the Power BI Report Builder, and the very powerful Power BI Desktop. And that really can propagate across a large number of users. And really, genuinely, one of the last things, because we are talking about the CFO, is we want to move them beyond just simply Excel-based financial reports. And so what that ultimately means, if we look at this is a trial balance. It's nice, there's some good things that are here. What it also means is that you can interact with it by changing some of the filters and looking at different companies or financial entities and things of that nature, which are important and give just that added capability when you have an underlying data set that's analytically oriented. As a result, things like P&L and others, really start to kind of surface some of the things within the data that people want to explore a bit further. But what's really great is when the data is really complete and comprehensive, not only can you look at financially oriented reporting, such as the statement of cash flows on the left here, but you can also have analytics that help complement what that view is. So that decision maker really sees, a lot of different elements that are relevant to them. So that's, kind of our premise, is that there's a lot of things that we need to do, and we'll kind of wrap this up in a few moments, but we don't want to lose sight of the fact that there's some really powerful things that Rich wants to walk through with us in terms of enriching your ERP data, the analytic techniques that we would explore using Power BI and SAP Business One, and obviously, Excel being part of the solution. And so hand it over to Rich, and then we'll come back and we'll do a little bit of wrap up and certainly capture some of your questions too. So Rich, you in a spot you want to share your screen?
Yeah, thank you, Trey. Trey, just to make sure you can hear me, correct?
Yeah, sure can.
Okay, I will start sharing my screen. Let's, Trey, you may have to stop sharing, I think. Trey, I don't know if you can hear me, but I think you may need to stop sharing. Okay, there we go. There we go. Okay, perfect. Yeah, Trey, just to confirm, can you see my screen?
Sure can, Rich.
Awesome. Okay, so today I'm going to kind of just do I'm going to walk through a couple of scenarios that are common tasks that that you may want to do regarding your reporting and things that a CFO may want to do. And the first thing that we're going to start off with is, how do we bring in other data sets? So, you know, with Zap, one of the strongest things that it delivers is the capability of being able to bring together different data sets. So you may have SAP data, but how do you merge that with data from Excel? Maybe it's forecast or budgeting information. How do you bring that in? So I'm going to walk through that. I'm also going to touch on what does Zap provide Power BI, and why would you want to use the combination of Zap and Power BI, especially from a financial perspective. So we'll show a couple of scenarios there. And we'll also spend a little bit of time in terms of what does Zap do how does Zap help in the financial capacity with the Zap analytics. So maybe you want to still use Power BI, but maybe you also discover that that there's some reporting scenarios where you still want to use the Zap analytics in combination. So let's talk about what we're looking at here. So when you log on, and I'm assuming the role of someone that is doing the data modeling and working with the actual behind the scenes data layer here. So this is someone that is typically doing bringing together different Excel sheets. They could be writing queries, etc. So I want to show how easy it is to bring in the initial data set. So here's the administrative layer of this data model. So, you know, Trey had mentioned that we deliver these pre-built analytics. It's made possible by all this work here. So first off, we see what data sources that we're bringing in. So right now we can see we're connected to an SAP B1, but we also have some Excel sheets that we're bringing in. And as I mentioned, we're going to bring in an Excel file here. The pipelines information just show all the information of the transformations that's being done to that data. So just know that what Zap is doing behind the scenes with each one of these pipelines, there is a lot of work. So we could look at, you know, things like if we look at inventory, for example, you can see that there's this complex SQL stuff that Zap is doing automatically to present the data from SAP B1 inventory very easily. So instead of looking at all this complex code and all this stuff, it provides this data in this fashion. And we do that with all aspects. But again, I just wanted to show that there's a lot going on here. So let's go back to that scenario where I'm a CFO and I am requesting my analyst to bring in budget information. How easy would it be to bring this information in? So I'm going to go in and I'm going to start off by just selecting my data source. And you'll notice that I'm not just limited to Excel-based data. This could be data coming from SQL, Oracle, etc. So I already have a budget file prepared. And you can see this is my Excel budget file. So we have the year, we have the month, we have the company, and then we have the forecasted sales amount, right? So this is the data that I'm going to bring in. So, oops, let me go back. So I'm going to connect to my Excel workbook. I'm going to upload that particular file. and I'm going to bring that in. And that's it. That is now bringing in this information. It's going to see it's going to ask which sheets that you want to bring over. We just want the budget data. So we'll just finish that off. And what it's going to do is it's going to bring in that budget data information into our data model, but it's also going to go one step further. It's going to see if there's anything that it can relate to. So like, there's a date column in there. So it's probably going to relate to our date dimension. And it's going to interrogate to see if there's anything else that it can relate to. But there's our budget. And so if I come down to our pipelines, we can search for what we just brought in by searching for budget. And there it is, right? So there's our budget data. And if I click on to that, you can see all this information is there. So exactly the same the information that I brought in. And if I go to the relationships, you can see that it actually found some relationships. So it detected that there's a relationship to company, there's a relationship to date, and there's a couple date fields here. And if we want to change any of these, like let's say that instead of using the month column, I want to use the date column for our relationship, we can do that. And if I and think of this as just doing a lookup, but the premise here is I'm bringing in the data, it's detecting these relationships, and I can change these relationships if I want. And that's really the point there. And that's all I need to do to bring in this data. So this budget data is now it's been brought in. The only other thing that we got to do is just process the model. And so what we're going to instruct Zap to do is to just only process our budget information. And that's all we're going to process here. Now, in a real world scenario, you wouldn't have to kick this process off. This process configuration here, just so you know, is this keeps your data up to date. So as you bring data in, you don't have to manually start every process model. This will actually bring the information already on a regular interval. So you can set up like, I want my data to be refreshed every night, or I want my, maybe it's my operational inventory data to be updated every hour, right? So you can set up multiple configurations here to keep your data updated. The only reason I just did this manual is because I wanted to start this process immediately right here to bring this budget in. But you'll see it comes in pretty quickly. And here's our log here, just showing us our different steps that it's going through. And within just a couple seconds here, we'll be able to work with this data. Okay, so the budget information is in. So now what do I want to do? I want to build a sales report that compares actuals versus our budget. So let's do that. So if I come into our new analysis report, I'm going to connect to the model that Zap has built for me, the SAP Business One model. I'm going to go to our measures. And you can see here's that budget data that we just brought in. And I also want our sales data. So I'm going to come into our sales data and we want total sales. We're going to bring in total sales, but I want to compare it against our budget data, right? And so here's that forecast. So if I bring over forecast, here's our sales, here's our forecast. And now what I want to do is I also want to limit this down to a particular year. So I'm going to bring over our date hierarchy and we're going to say the forecast was just for 2020. So we're going to go down to 2020 and we want to look at this month over month. So I'm going to dig in and I'm just going to pull our month value. And so very quickly now I have what's our actual sales versus our forecast. And at this point I can come in here and I could just create a quick calculation that says what's our forecast minus our sales. And so we can quickly see which months are above, which months are lower. And even further, if I want to just make this even just more interesting, I can present this in a heat map to just kind of visually show, whoops, wrong field. Give me 1 second. Where is it? So here, what I can do is I can just throw see, okay, here's where my biggest issue is. So very quickly, you're able to kind of just zero in on the important pieces of data. And from here, you can convert this into a chart, etc. I'm running out of time. I would go into that, but now I want to jump over to Power BI because so there's a lot of analytical capabilities here, but I want to stress the fact that what Zap is doing with the data modeling layer is really augmenting the power of Power BI. So let's jump over to Power BI. First of all, what I want to cover off is when you log into Power BI, you have this ability to get apps. And if you want to review any of our apps, you can just type in Zap and you can see all these apps that we have there. One's for, you can see there's inventory, manufacturing, accounts payable, etc. There's a lot there. So I really would stress just reviewing these. And now you'll see that I'm bringing up our financial analytics here. So you can see here's sort of a financial overview of the business. You have things telling you gross margin, AR, liquidity, operating profit. You have a P&L that's set up for you in Power BI that you can customize. Additionally, with balance sheet and expense analysis, etc. So there's all this information here that is already available that we've developed for you. But with Power BI, we get some additional capabilities that kind of help us understand what is going on with the data. So if I'm the CFO type and I'm looking at August and I see that there is a dip in August, I may want to interrogate this. And I have this analyze feature that's part of Power BI that tells me where maybe some of this issue is coming from. And you can see if I come down here, it looks like Monday and Tuesday had the most significant decreases during that time frame. It tells you also which particular days had the biggest drop. So it's trying to point you into the direction of, hey, what could be the reasons for why this information is dropping? Additionally, let's say that, okay, this Power BI is, maybe you are not familiar with Power BI and you're looking at this and you're saying, hey, there's a lot more to learn and I feel comfortable with Excel. That's great. So if you come in here and you want to look at this information, you want to build your own report off of this information within Excel, you could come into the out-of-the-box Power BI dashboards and you do the Analyze in Excel capability. And when you do that, it'll allow you to download in an Excel file that has access to the same data that's there. And you can see it's pretty easy to just, you'll see that you have this access to a pivot table that you can build pretty much any report that you need to based off of the data that you saw there. And you can see all these elements on the data model here. For sake of time, I went ahead and just built out a working capital one by just making some selections here and just showing us what is our working capital month over month. And here's a chart on it. And with Excel, with any kind of Power Pivot capability, you can always drill into those details if you want to get down to a daily view. But the point is it's easy to bring this into Excel and work with the data. Last thing I want to cover off is just a couple other things that you can do within Power BI. So let's say that you want to, so I'm now looking at sort of the Power BI desktop view of this information, which is all that same information that we showed. We had the P&L overview, the balance sheet, the expenses, and we added on this KPI dashboard. So one thing I want to highlight that's very important to what we're doing to augment Power BI. We talked about how Zap is bringing together all the relevant information from SAP Business One, and it's presenting it in an easy, consumable fashion. We're doing that on Power BI as well, and there's a lot of work that was done to the data model in Power BI. So if I look at this, you'll see that I have all these measurements that I can do off of our financials. So if you're a CFO and you want to have access to all these kind of key financials, cash ratios, working capital ratio, all these things are right here. And if you're slightly technical and you want to say, hey, what really is going on with these metrics? You can come in and you can click on, and you may not be an expert in terms of how to read these calculations. You don't need to be, but it gives you a sense for, you know, what it's doing. So at least you get some kind of you have that understanding of how these metrics are being created. So again, there's a lot of work that's being done behind the scenes, and if you're curious, you can go and take a look. But it allows us to easily build a report. So if I want to look at our working capital over time and I want to add it to this, it really is as easy as just clicking on working capital and then coming down, selecting our dates, and if we want month to be presented over, so here's our month over month working capital. And then if you do want to mess with Power BI just a little bit more, you'll see that there's some capability here where I can come in here, I can, you know, make the header a little bit bigger so it's easier to read. I can change the colors, etc. And just as I had mentioned too, you have this analyze feature right within Power BI that helps you understand what is driving these changes. Last thing that I want to cover off of that I personally think is kind of a cool feature of Power BI that I think would be relevant to a lot of the financial folks is you have this capability of this decomposition tree. And this just keeps pointing you to what drives the biggest changes. So if I wanted to look at, say, our GL, and I'm just looking at what is the biggest contributions to a GL, right? Just high level. So I can come in here, choose our GL amount. And now if I dig into this, what I'm going to look at is it's going to see what's making up the biggest portion. We can dig into expenses. We can dig further into, we see that that's coming from the P&L. We can dig further into that to see what else is kind of driving this. It just allows you to kind of dig deeper very quickly within the data without really having to spend much time. And this is all made possible by what Zap is doing behind the scenes with the SAP data model. So there's a lot going on that you're able to kind of work with very quickly. You can make use of many of the powerful functions within Power BI. This is just one of them. You could keep playing around with this. You can, instead of looking at the high values, you can look at the low values, what's contributing, etc. So there's just a lot of capabilities here. But I know I'm running kind of a little over time, so my apologies, Trey. I just wanted to kind of get this last one in and just kind of show that off. But
we love your enthusiasm, Rich, and it's really, I think that people are getting a lot of value out of this. That's excellent. Do you want to pass back or?
Yep, I'm stopping now.
Okay, great. And very well may have to make myself a presenter again, as crazy as that is. Here we go. So we'll show the screen. Very good. Thank you so much for that, Rich. In terms of, just kind of wrapping up, and again, folks, as we wrap up here, please do put your questions into the Q&A panel because we do want to make sure we get across those. From unlocking your organization's happiness, just not only your CFO, providing the right data and tools, be it Zap Data Hub and Power BI or other things is certainly essential. Giving insight to everybody means that the right people are really involved. From a perspective standpoint, you can answer a certain amount of questions for the business, but at the end of the day, you need to give them the breadth of the data and the ability to explore. And from a timing standpoint, ensuring that you have the right data available to them that's current. That doesn't mean that they have to wait, days for the information to refresh and other things is essential. And the right amount of effort. We've got a data platform that we feel like is going to be very complementary to the things that you would want to do in Power BI. And so we'd encourage you to explore that. So I'm going to pop up a last poll just to see what your views are on kind of the information that we shared. Again, please put in the questions in the Q&A panel for us so that Rich and I can answer it. And we will also obviously be available via the email addresses we'll show again in just a moment, or you can learn more generally about the product at b1datahub.com or zapbi.com. So we'll give it a moment for people to ask some questions. Trying to resize the questions. So while we're collecting this, there's been one question that has come in that just simply wants to know, let's see, Zap Data Hub created by which database? Not sure I 100% follow, but essentially what we're doing is we are creating a either SQL Server or Azure SQL data store, as well as SQL Server analysis services or Azure analysis services, tabular or MoLAP Cube. Oh, okay. So the person went on to say that SAP HANA is an analytic database. Is Zap building another one on top of that? On top of that, making HANA essentially a relational database for the ERP. Yeah, that is what happened. So we're extracting from either HANA or SQL Server, depending on where your SAP Business One product is based on. And from there, we're moving that across. From the can this be a benefit to HANA Analytics? We're certainly not experts on that, but the data source that we create, which is SQL Server based, I believe can be uploaded into HANA Analytics if desired. So let's see, we're getting any other questions here. And we're going to close the poll here. Thank you for those of you that replied. We'll get back to the slides, but let's see. My CFO is not happy that we spend days getting reports like you showed correct for our business every month. How much time do your users typically save? I think that's one of those. It's you can pretty much expect that financial reports and things of that nature, the only things that are having to be done to make financial reports more correct for your organization on an ongoing basis are the transactions that you would do to obviously be adjusting transactions and things at the end of a financial period. There's no readapting reports and things, especially if you're assembling financials and other stuff from Excel, where that is typically problematic if you're not using some automation. We tend to automate quite a bit. Is Zap only for financial analytics and reports? No, we're not. And if you go to AppSource and look at the things that Rich had mentioned, within Power BI, you can get access to the other apps. Again, there's supply chain elements, there's sales elements, there's purchasing and the like. We use SAP Analytics Cloud. We heard from our partner that they want a minimum of 25 users. How much does Zap cost? It's probably a little bit hard to to fully quantify, but what I can absolutely say is that we are aware that there are some changes with regard to the minimum number of users for Analytics Cloud. Certainly our perspective is that what Rich was able to show around Data Hub and the prepackaged analytical content, and frankly, the ability to explore a bit further is of tremendous value. And frankly, from a price point, we understand it's not dramatically different than what people are paying for Analytics Cloud. So we'd love to have that conversation a little bit more personally with folks, but obviously there's not like a single number that we can just quote. Thank you very much for that question. Let's see what else we've got. How do you apply row level security? Rich, you want to talk just for a moment about security in Zap Data Hub?
Yeah, so row level security can be applied. It was on the, so as part of the administrative layer there is the ability to say, hey, how do you want to secure the data? Do you want to secure the data based on company, based on customer, based on region? So you can set up a user has access to a particular company, a particular region, particular set of customers, that type of information. And then when you set that permission setting within Zap, they are only ever going to be seeing that level of detail or that level of information. So the broad, they're not going to be able to see all companies or all regions depending on how they set that. So it's very easy to put that forth.
That's excellent. Thank you, Rich. And, thank you everybody for attending today. We did get a question with regard to the slides. We will send out some notification of the recording so that folks can have access to that. Again, if you need further information, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself. Again, I'm Trey Johnson, or trey.johnson@zapbi.com, and we'll be happy to take that conversation to the next step. So thank you, everybody. Rich, wonderful demo today. Thank you so much. We'll see everybody again for our next B1 webinar on September the 24th. And until then, stay well. Thanks.
Thank you. Take care.